So in other words, when you're really happy and you're just happy all by yourself, we might call that self-love. But then when you go out into the world and you're just happy, you're not trying to intentionally love anybody. You're just full of happiness and you're full of self-love. You get it all over everybody and everything without trying. And you do so without an expectation of reciprocity. You do it just because it feels so good to you. You just are love. You're not being loving. You are love. You're full of love. It's like the Jesus sort of story when the woman touched his garment and all of a sudden she's healed. Like it was not a conscious effort to do anything about it. Just love that just flowed from him.
I believe every single person has a ministry. Ministry isn't just for preachers and it's not just for pastors. It's the way you shine the light that God gave you through his Spirit in all spaces that he's trusted you to walk. That means you on your college campus. That means you at your corporate job. That means you in high school. That means you with your friends at the bar or the restaurant. That means you wherever you are. You have the responsibility to shine God's light in that space, and you get the chance to. Friend, you are beautiful, you are worthy, and you are made to shine. Everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Made to Shine show. I am so tickled excited right now because we are in for such a treat, you guys. We have the super impressive, just light exuding, wonderful Robert Mack on with us today. Robert, thank you for being on the show. What's up? Welcome.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. That was an amazing intro. I have to tell you, I need to come back here just to be uplifted and inspired. Thank you for that.
Oh my gosh. Well, again, as we were talking about previously, the mission of the show is to remind every single person they have a ministry. It doesn't matter if you're a preacher or pastor. It's like the way you live your life in all spaces God has trusted you with. And I mean, looking at you from afar, you are a celebrity happiness coach. You're an executive coach, a positive psychology coach. You've been on TV. You're a published author. You do so much, but you shine this beautiful, consistent light in every regard that God has trusted you with and that you walk out. And so, of course, wanted you on to inspire this upcoming generation, everybody tuning in, because that's so rare to see, but so needed to see in this day and age. And so excited to get started. But we do have a tradition on this podcast before we dive in, which is kicking it off with what is your favorite quote and why?
Wow, that is such a challenge for me. I have so many. My mom jokes and says I'm the quote master.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the practices that for me has become very, very helpful is contemplative prayer. And that's like often scripture. It's repeating scripture and then feeling into the truth of it. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is, seek the kingdom of heaven within and the rest will be added. I sort of live my life that way. At least I attempt to, and I sort of aspire to live my life that way. So I'd say that's the first one, straight out of scripture. And then I'd say that there's another one I love from A Course in Miracles. And that is, that which is real can't be threatened. That which is unreal doesn't exist. Herein lies the peace of God. It's one of my favorites.
Wow. Wait, say that again. That was so good.
Yeah. That which is real can't be threatened. That which is unreal doesn't exist. Herein lies the peace of God. Right? So in other words, if you think it can be threatened or you feel it can be threatened, then it's not real. If it's real, it can't be threatened. And if it's unreal, it doesn't exist at all. And so I think of things like unhappiness and conflict and chaos. For sure, on the surface level, it feels like all those things are so real. But if you dive deeper within yourself and within your experience of what any of us might call God, you begin to discover that only peace is there, only joy is there, only happiness and love is there.
That reminds me of a quote I love. So we might be competing for a quote now.
I love it. Bring it.
I mean, I'm telling you what, every year for my birthday, Mom gets me a plaque of another quote that I love. It's a very easy gift to go to for her. But a quote that I love is, if you're anxious, you're living in the future. If you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're at peace, you're living right now.
Oh,
and I think that aligns so beautifully with what you talked about in regards to like what is real. Even for me, I know when I get really anxious, typically I do a pulse check. I'm like, is anything I'm worrying about, has it actually happened? Like, is there evidence support for this claim that's making me lose sleep right now.
Oh, Amy, I love that. I
And
love that.
but I think what's so powerful about what you do and kind of going into that quote and my hypothesis in to regards to why you love it so much is, I mean, you're a happiness coach. Like you're coaching people how to take a lot of these feelings and practically work through them, not avoid them, not ignore them, but work through them to reach this ultimate realization of what it means to be truly happy. And another quote I love is, you are most qualified to serve the person you once were. And so I would love to hear, Robert, I mean, out of all the things to coach about with happiness, like my hypothesis is that you weren't always this way and you walked a journey that led you to this point of recognizing how needed it is. So talk to us about the person you once were, that you're almost like, that's your avatar of serving right now through your work.
Wow. You give me shivers. I get these things I call soul shivers when you connect with somebody's truth or they connect with your truth in such a deep way. You nailed it. I mean, I am a happiness coach primarily because I was so unhappy for so long. I was deeply depressed and suicidal for over 2 decades. And my first memories in life were at about 6 or 7 years of age. And I just remember being so stressed out, so anxious, so self-loathing and self-hating that I just didn't want to exist. I hated everything about myself, and I just hoped that I would grow out of it. I thought I'll do well, hopefully academically, maybe athletically. I wanted to be a professional basketball player, so I hoped I could be like, Michael Jordan or something. And, of course, that part didn't happen. But I did do well in school, and I did well in sports. And the depression didn't go away. It just got worse. And I got to a place where I was deeply, severely suicidal. I thought about suicide and killing myself, honestly, hundreds of times a day. I thought about it more than anything or anyone else in the world. And I eventually got to a place where I decided I was going to do something about it. So I did a little research, and I decided I was going to slash my wrist. So, I got a steak knife out of the kitchen, and I stuck it in my wrist. And then I had, let me tell you, one of the strangest, most unexpected experiences of my life, probably the most unexpected and strange experience of my life. When I dug that knife in, without anything changing my external conditions, meaning I had a pretty good life, quite frankly, I just didn't feel good about this good life that I had. Despite having a good life on the outside and despite nothing changing when I dug the knife in, I suddenly felt a kind of peace and love and joy that I had never experienced before, that I definitely didn't expect to experience at that moment in my life. And I'd say most people spend their lives trying to feel or experience. And so at that point, I decided I was going to postpone the suicide for honestly, it was like 5 or 10 minutes. It was now it's almost laughable because it feels such a small period of time. But then it felt like impossible. I didn't think I could last 5 minutes or 10 minutes without killing myself. But in that period of time, I began doing a different kind of research around what depression is, what unhappiness is, what happiness is. And, it's been, I guess, 2 decades since then. And things have changed so dramatically for me. I feel so fortunate and blessed.
Well, one, thank you for sharing all of that. And two, I think what's so powerful about that, I'm such a believer, when Jesus came back, right? He had scars and he didn't, he's the Son of God. He could have come back perfect, looking like Thor, and he didn't. He came back with scars in the hopes that we too might believe and heal. And one, just want to give admiration and gratitude where it's due, because when people when you go through what you went through and you share that, you're showing your scars in the hopes that others listening might heal. And that's what's so powerful. And I think there's this you talk about loving from the inside out. And what's so powerful about your story is you were chasing all these external means to try to make you happy, which a lot of us do. And we're actually a lot of times coached to do that. Have a goal. It will motivate you. But ultimately where you found peace came from the inside out, not the out. So talk to me about the relationship there, the difference between happiness when it comes from an external metric and means of achieving it versus what it actually feels like to experience that from the inside out.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I'd say that the happiness, or what we call happiness that we get from the outside, is mostly pleasure. And that doesn't mean that true happiness isn't pleasurable or pleasant. But most of the happiness that you experience, that we call happiness, that you get from the new car, the new relationship, the promotion, more money, nice clothes, that doesn't last for very long. And it's very fleeting, very temporary. it never delivers as much happiness as you expect it to, and it doesn't last as long as you expect it to. The kind of happiness that I talk about, true happiness and true love too, and true self-love, is the kind that is always there within you, that isn't based on conditions or circumstances, that doesn't come and go. It always lives within you, really lives as you, day in and day out, regardless of what anybody else thinks, says, or does, regardless of what does and doesn't happen to you. It's the kind of peaceful aliveness that we all strive for and try to find in other people and other things in the world, but never do, and can only be found when you dive deep inside. And so we all know this happiness. We all know this kind of peaceful aliveness and this love. The challenge is that we often overlook it and we seek it out in the world. And so there's another quote that you are probably very familiar with that I love, which is that, we seek that which we are. We want to stop doing that. We seek what we are. So we look for the happiness and the love and the peace out in the world, and we hope we'll get it from other people and things, but that doesn't happen. And if it seems like it happens, it only happens for a very short period of time, and then we're back at square one again. So I love this idea, not the idea, the experience that we all want to have, and that we all have consistently, don't always notice it or recognize it, which is the kind of peace and love and happiness that's unconditional, that's immovable, that's unshakable, and that cannot be touched by any person, place, or thing.
Oh. And ultimately, I think, so going back to your first quote you mentioned, which is scripture, like seek first the kingdom, all else will follow, right? Like, and I think about, we often, like you said, seek what we are. What we are is oftentimes what we identify ourselves with. And so there is this shift and like in getting into kind of faith and where Jesus fits into this for you, like the shift there of like, were you always someone that sought knowing you were a son of God and understanding that? Or where did faith play into this timeline of what you've gone through?
Oh, Annie, how many hours do you have?
All of them. I love talking about this kind of stuff.
I so appreciate you. So I had a very difficult time with, the Bible, with Christianity, with religion. I tried really hard. I always had, a heart for it. There's no question about that. And I remember two incidences that really stuck out in my mind. The first is, I remember trying to read the Bible, starting with the Old Testament, and just not really getting very far, and feeling so much more guilt and shame and anxiety and judgment. And I later look back now and realize there was a mistake in doing it that way. The other incident I remember once is I went to church, and it was great church, and I was a child. I had the mind of a child. So I went to church, and I remember the minister saying something profound, like, it's even a sin to think sinful thought. That's even a sin. And then I remember having a conversation with my mom, and then I walked away, and she was very helpful and comforting, but I walked away and remember thinking, based on this sermon, that I was going straight to hell. Because all I was doing at that age, which was about 13, was thinking about girls all the time. Thinking about girls all the time at like 14, 15. So I remember having a really hard time. I tried to understand and wanted to understand the Bible, but I felt so much judgment and anxiety and guilt and self-hating and self-loathing around that experience that I actually, for a long time, and thank God for other paths and spiritual traditions, because in a strange, ironic, beautiful way, they all led me back to a deeper felt mystical experience of what you and I might call Jesus or God or Christ, So yeah, it was really beautiful in the end, but in the process, it was really tough, really tough.
But I think so many people relate to that in regard, because like there is such a misconstrued message of the world with religion, and like we try to put Jesus into religion, whereas like that's what the Pharisees did, that he was, you know what I mean? And like God is love and Jesus is love. And I just think what I'd love to get an understanding too, because I think you have such a beautiful perspective. Like someone once said, the greatest sermon you'll ever preach requires no words. It's the way you live your life. And I think about that every time. And another quote for you. The only message of the Bible someone might ever read is the way you live your life. Make sure it reads lovingly. Because at the end of the day, it's like, how do you shine your light and love so well that people are like, who do you know? What do you know that I don't? Because that's what Jesus came to radically change the world with love, not condemnation. And I just think, so I'm curious for you, like a lot of well-meaning Christians, just because of the way they were taught, they feel like they're not allowed to love themselves, and almost like God loves them like a group insurance policy. Like, my son died for you, so you're covered, versus like the fact that God delights in them and likes them. And so how have you matured in understanding, like, no, because of Jesus and his love for me, like, I can love myself too? Like, what does that relationship look like?
Oh boy. Wow. There's so much you said there. It's just so powerful and poignant. So yes to all of that. For me, yes, the world doesn't need to hear another sermon as much as it needs to see one and experience one, right? So, love churches, and also real value in lighthouses. Lighthouses just stand there shining and everybody's drawn to them.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that illustration.
Yeah.
I've
Like
not heard that.
right? You just want to light up from the inside out. It's really actually what I call enlightenment, because you're lighting up from the inside out. And in your enlightenment and you're lighting up, you're also lightening up. So you're less burdened. You basically cast your cares on Christ, the Christ of God. And you're also just, your life is lighter. You enjoy things more. And so for me, a huge part of it, interestingly enough, was really trying to more deeply and fully appreciate and understand what even small words like God meant. It's a small word, but it's just, I was like, I was trapped. I'm a thinker, and I was trapped in language and words. And so in the beginning, when I heard a word like God, it was so confusing to me on one hand. On the other, I felt shame and judgment around it because I had some programming and conditioning there that wasn't very helpful. And so I began to sort of do a few things. One was I became a lot more inclusive in the kinds of teachings and teachers that I would listen to and try to, feel into. And that was very helpful. I read a book once by Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk, called Buddha and Jesus as Brothers. It was very helpful for me, like things like that. So I'd read I'd read and listen to these teachers, because the whole effort was like, let me not just have thoughts and words about God or Jesus or whatever it is. Let me actually have an experience. Let me have an experience that transcends thoughts and words. That's an experience of peace, love, and happiness in my heart. And to your point, I feel very deeply that we're all made in the image and likeness of God. If you're made in the image and likeness of God, what is there to love? I mean, what is there not to love? There's only love in the image and likeness of God. And so, yes, you make a great point, which is that I would say, based on my experience, that self-love and peace and happiness is your divine destiny, and it's your divine purpose. And just because you don't feel it all the time, or don't think you feel it all the time, doesn't mean that you're not living your divine destiny and divine purpose. But there's nothing that I think glorifies God more that way than loving yourself, loving others, being at peace, and enjoying happiness.
So what I love about your story, and I can relate to a regard, like I think every single person, so I grew up South United States, Bible Belt. Like I lived in Georgia my entire life. I went to school in South Carolina. So what I see is that a lot of people adopt just their parents' beliefs. Even that's religiously, that's politically, it's easier to say, whatever it's passed on. And instead of saying like, no, I'm going to think about this for myself, and I'm going to figure out what's important to me. What does this mean? And so for me, I'm a big believer, like, you only know how much you really believe something when you do challenge it. It's like a muscle. It's like working out. You only know how strong it is when you put it to the test and when you work it. And so I read a lot of books written by atheists. Like and I've listened to a lot of debates, because I'm like, no, what is their side? What are they saying? Like I looked, and I think that's such good. But like, if anybody listening in, like, you need to lean into the hard questions. The best thing my dad ever told me was, Annie, like, and he's a Jesus follower, but he went through his own journey and was like, if God's real, if Jesus is real, he's not afraid of your questions. He welcomes them, because you're only as strong as the questions you allow yourself to ask. And you know what I mean? So like, I love that practical piece of advice. It's like, lean into that, because for me now with my faith, like, not that it's bulletproof by any means, but I'm so confident in God answering my questions through a book, through these conversations, that like, I've seen it time and time again. He loves curiosity. Jesus asked so many questions while he was here on earth. So I love that. And I love, like, you're talking about the relationship between self-love and happiness. And I'm curious, is self-love, is one a prerequisite for the other? Like, is it important to have self-love first and then you have habit, or what does that look like?
So, great question, Annie. So a lot of what I've come to discover over lots of painstaking years, like studying and trying to feel into all this and reading from people that are way smarter than me and wiser than me, and then also going to meditation and prayer with it, is that most of what we use in language are actually synonyms. So one thing I've discovered is that self-love is happiness. Self-love is your happiness. So in other words, we could say it this way. When you're deeply self-loving, you're happy. When you're happy, you're deeply self-loving. It's impossible really to be truly happy unless you're self-loving. And it's impossible to be truly self-loving if you're not also happy, right? So they're synonyms in a way. My dad had this great expression, which I still feel deeply. He said, don't ever let your schooling get in the way of your education. And the way I hear that is like, don't ever let your thoughts or beliefs about something get in your way of the experience of that something, right? So our thoughts and words and the ideas that we've inherited and these, beliefs that we've been passed down to us often are the very obstacles that prevent us from having an experience of, let's say, happiness or self-love or peace. But I say that self-love and happiness and peace and love are really just different ways of talking about the same phenomenon. So one way to put it is this: when you're deeply happy and you share that happiness, we call it love. So in other words, when you're really happy and you're just happy all by yourself, we might call that self-love. But then when you go out into the world and you're just happy, you're not trying to intentionally love anybody. You're just full of happiness and you're full of self-love. You get it all over everybody and everything without trying. And you do so without an expectation of reciprocity. You do it just because it feels so good to you. You just are love. You're not being loving. You are love. You're full of love. It's like the Jesus sort of story when the woman touched his garment and all of a sudden she's healed. Like it was not a conscious effort to do anything about it. Just love that just flowed from him. So, right. Yeah. So the idea is, for me, is it's easy to get stuck in language and words and semantics. And we want to start there. And I think as you continue diving into the experience of these things, you tend to find that a lot of these words are synonyms for each other. Another example I'll just use. I had really struggled with the word God for a long time. And sometimes I even felt a little strange about the word Jesus, because I had friends that were Buddhist and friends that were Muslim and friends that were Taoist. And I was like, I don't want to, on one hand, offend anybody. On the other, I want to honor everyone. And I remember reading somewhere, a very simple book by Ernest Holmes. He said something like, don't complicate it. God is life. Just stop life. So the life that he said, no, you don't have to ask anybody if they believe in life. Nobody says, I don't believe in life. In fact, not only do you not have to believe in life, you know life, you live life, you are life. And he said, that is God. Life, your life, the life that exists within you. And I remember that changed my whole world when I suddenly was like, oh, wow. So I can see why atheists on one hand believe what they believe, and I see why everybody believes what they believe. But if we were really to sit down together and we were really to work at it, together and say, do we all believe in life? We'd say, yeah, well, not only do we believe in life, we know life, we are life. So I say all that just to say it's easy to get lost in thoughts and words. And thoughts and words can be very helpful at the same time to helping us discover the deeper, essential meaning of the experience itself.
Oh my gosh. It so makes sense. And it's so good. Cause I think there is that relationship between self-love, but also we live in a world where we're required to love other people. You know what I mean? Like we're constantly around other people. And I think a lot of times, our self-love, it is like there are influences with our love in relation to other people. And do you have a thought?
You're sparking something. So you nailed something. So what I've discovered and feel is that if you don't love yourself, you can't really authentically love other people, because you want to call it love. But if you're empty inside and you're trying to love somebody else, you're really just loving in order to get something from them. You're loving them in order to get love back, right? You're giving it to get it. So it's not really, I wouldn't call that love. Even the tax collectors do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So true love, authentic love, divine love is being so full of your realization, your recognition, your experience of Christ consciousness that you are full of love. You might call that also happiness. You're so full of it that when you go and you meet anyone, connect with anyone, you give love and happiness out of your overflow from a place of abundance, right? So you're like a rain cloud that is so full of all this moisture, so full of all this peace, love, and happiness, so full of Christ consciousness that at some point you want to explode. And instead of, and essentially what you do is you can't help yourself, but you start to rain down that peace and that love and that self-love and that experience of Christ on everybody and everything without any expectation of reciprocity or reward, without any quid pro quo. You do it simply to feel better because it's unburdening. It's a relieving of the peace, love, and happiness and Christ consciousness that exists within you. And so I'd say that that's why self-love, we'll call it that, self-love is absolutely critical to loving other people. You can't truly, authentically, without strings attached, love other people if you are empty inside and you don't love yourself.
Oh my gosh, you just sparked so many things in my mind because it's so true. Like I think I used to define or grade how well I loved contingent on whether or not the person reciprocated the love that I gave, and in well-intentioned. And I think we're called to be lights of the world. We're called to, like, second commandment, love your neighbor as you love yourself. You know what I mean? Like, we're called to love, but I think how we grade that love, we have it all backwards. And okay, this is gonna blow your mind. So I literally was talking to someone the other day about this analogy, and it's so God, just like this whole moment and what you're saying, because we were talking about self-love and living in the overflow. And they gave this illustration that blew my mind. They said most people, like, imagine you have a vase. I have a Powerade water bottle for those not watching the YouTube version, but imagine you have a vase. And this vase is filled with water and it wants to fill all the cups around it. And so it pours and it pours and it pours and it pours. Eventually, it runs out. And now imagine you have a vase sitting over an ever-flowing stream. And they used God's love as that. It's like if you sit on God's love for you, it fills you up. And then all of a sudden, you never stop running out of love. So it overflows and it can fill an infinite amount of cups. Whereas when you're pouring from your own source, you run out of how many cups you can fill because you run dry.
Wow.
And not only that, but I thought about what you said about loving and hoping to get something in return. When you're going from your own resource, which is limited, and you pour and pour and pour, eventually when you run dry, there's a sense of bitterness because all you see is everyone else who got your love and you have none left for yourself. And I was just like, whoa, okay. So when you cultivate that own, like, ever-flowing stream of self-love, now, what I'm curious, because this is where my mind went after I was talking about that, what the parameters of recognizing you are always in process and not being blind to that, like not saying I'm perfect, I have nothing wrong with me, like the difference between that and what actual self-love is. Because like, I think you coming from a background of sports and you did too, like the best coaches who loved me the most weren't the ones that always said I was doing a good job. They were the ones that said they spoke life into me and kindness. And sometimes that kindness was saying, you can improve here. You're not doing this well. So what's the relationship between, like, recognizing there's things to work on, but doing it in a way that's loving?
Yeah. Oh boy, that is just so insightful what you just shared. I'm getting the shivers. So I say that so in Eastern spiritual traditions, they do something very interesting, which I've noticed I've picked up and haven't recognized it. When I talk about self-love, I talk about self with a capital S, and the true self of each of us is the Christ conscious with Christ within all of us. We're one. One with Christ, and one with. So when I talk about the love, self-love in particular, I'm talking about loving the Christ that I ultimately am one with, right? And so the essence of me, the heart of me, the core of me, that faceless, formless, infinite, eternal essence is perfect. That is perfect. And I'm also clear recognition that essence isn't a body, although it has a body, isn't a mind, but it has a mind. It isn't a personality, but it has a personality. It isn't a job, but it has a job. And so all of those things on the surface, the mind, the body, the personality, the way I speak or don't speak, all of that can be tweaked, can always be improved. And it can be best tweaked and best improved if I'm constantly in touch with the Christ center at my core, in my essence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so what that looks like then is you suddenly don't personalize things in the way that you used to. Somebody says, "Oh, you should do this." You just, "Oh, I could maybe do that," and then you check in, you meditate on it, you pray about it, and you see maybe I'll do that. See if God wants me to do that or not, and you say, "Okay, maybe I'll do it." In other cases, maybe not do that right now. And so, but the idea is essentially that when I'm loving myself, I'm feeling in to the peaceful aliveness or overflowing joy that I call Christ. When I'm loving other people, I'm not bearing false witness, which means not mistaking the appearance, meaning their body or their face or their mind, for who they ultimately are. Instead, I'm seeing through that or feeling through that to the core and essence of who and what they are, which is also Christ. Right? So the idea is that self-love is, really just feeling into the oneness, the connectedness that I have with God at all points in time. When I'm loving somebody else, I'm doing the same essential thing. And that doesn't mean that I can't also, ask them, to change in this particular way or do this particular thing for me. And I can't ask myself to do the same. I can, but I don't make that the primary game. That's not the main game I'm playing all day, every day. My main game, as much as I'm concerned, is like getting out of the way and saying, hey, no matter how much I work on myself, I'm never going to get it perfect. I'm never going to get it right. I'd rather just rest in God and see what God has come through for me. And that doesn't mean I don't try to make changes and tweaks now and then.
That just like unlocks something in my mind around because being a very type A person and wanting things to go a certain way, and it's funny because did you do the Enneagram?
Yes, of course. Yes, I'm a 9.
Are you? Okay. Are you a 3?
I'm a 9.
You're a 9.
Yeah,
What's a 9? What's a 9? I don't know what a 9 is.
Peacemaker.
Oh my gosh, you're like my mom's a peacemaker.
Oh,
So I'm a 3, but it's funny. A lot of people think I'm a 1, and I'm like, actually, I have the opposite problem. I am like just a fire kind of person, not an aim, shoot, fire. I could use some perfectionism in my life. But all that to say, I am my own worst critic, like always, and I think just in a lot of ways, I think a lot of people can relate to that. Like we are our own worst critics. But what unlocked in my brain as you were talking was like, wow, when I try to make things perfect, right? Like in a way, I'm inadvertently acting as if I'm God.
Boom.
Like
that's it.
God doesn't hold me to a God, like to his standard. He knows I'm not God.
That's boom. You're so good. Keep
and it's just like giving yourself that grace. That's the point. Like you're gonna fall short. That's not I hope you don't. That's no, you are. Like, know?
So there's a book, you probably have read it. It's called Practice in the Presence by Brother Lawrence. It's one
haven't. I must though. I must read it.
Right? Yes, because it's tiny and very simple, humble guy. And he just says that, he loves God. And he spends all of his day, as much as humanly possible, keeping his conversations in heaven. And by that, he means mostly just continuing to converse with, and sometimes it's through words and sometimes it's through silence, with God. All day, every day, no matter what he's doing. So he's doing dishes and he's, basically feeling into the presence of God. And then he's walking, feeling into the presence of God. And he basically says that, there's no difference for him between working and not working, between writing and not writing, because all the time, his primary priority and highest goal is just to feel in the presence of God. And so he says this, and I love this thing because it's made me feel so much better about certain things in my life. He says, as often as I can, I just stay in, felt oneness with God. And I say, God, if there's something to be done here, you're going to need to do it because I'm not very good at doing anything ever. So you do it. I'm going to leave it up to you, and I'll do it for my body, and I'll do everything I can to make that happen. And if anything goes wrong, he says, well, that's ultimately what's going to happen anytime I don't stay connected or feel into the presence of God. And he says, it relieves me of all feelings of anxiety and shame and guilt, because I know that as long as I stay in felt oneness and connectedness with the presence of God, that all is well and all will be well, and I'm doing my best. And I've just always loved that.
That requires so much humility. And I think what's so crazy to like one of the first things we talked about with your story, like trying to use all these external means to find happiness and find fulfillment, it's crazy but it's so God, how like we try to track success and happiness out here with our confidence, like, and competency. I could do this. I'm happier. I achieved this. I'm happier. But really the ultimate key to happiness and self-love is when you humble yourself and you go in. You sink in to what you always were. And that instruction, seek first the kingdom, it's like, that's your gateway to that, because you can only focus on one thing at a time. So if you're focusing on all you're doing and all you're accomplishing, which you're going to feel short because you're not God, which we talked about, then you're going to ultimately like run out of self-love. You're going to be that vase that isn't on a well. But if you seek first the kingdom, you're connecting to Christ in you, which humbles you to recognize who the actual victor is, which ironically makes you love yourself more because he loved you first.
That's boom. I mean, facts, right? Yes, I mean, that's exactly right. Like, my few intentions is I'm not the doer. So, I'm trying to practice that all day, every day, as much as possible. One, because it feels so good, and two, because it ends up allowing me to do much better. And so it's like if I'm going for a run, I try to feel into this presence of God and say, I'm not the doer here. Really, I'm not. If you think about it, all you're doing, what am I really doing? Am I moving my legs? Could I possibly move my leg or a single finger or a hair in my head were it not for life, were it not for God? No, of course not. Could I hang the earth on nothing, which is what it's hanging on? Hang the earth on nothing, rotate it on its axis, revolve it around the super hot star at just a distance and not burn us up or freeze us? I can't do any of that. So really, ultimately, am I in control of any of it? No, I'm not. The most I can do is stay in conscious awareness and recognition that there is a life force, energy, presence that some of us call God, some of us call Christ, other people call Buddha, some of us call, all kinds of things, that is always ultimately in control. And I don't need to worry, and I don't need to take anxious thought. And I also, to your point, don't need to idol worship, right? And that's ultimately what it is. Idol worshiping is really setting up things in the world, right, as idols, as something that you seek out and worship, rather than going directly to the source for it. Right? So there's sort of like imitation versions of what you ultimately want. What you ultimately want is the experience of the presence of God, which you have all day, every day, and it just takes a conscious awareness of it. When you attend to that, you also are surprised because the rest of that quote, which we spoke about earlier, which is that when you seek the kingdom of heaven within, the rest is added. Sometimes I say the rest is included. But the idea is when you constantly practice the presence of God, all the other presence, gifts, tend to show up on their own in divine timing, without so much effort, without so much stress and anxiety, without the struggle and strain, without the hustle and bustle. And so all of a sudden your life becomes much more fluid and relaxed and joyful and abundant, and yet you're not doing any of it.
Yeah, that's so good. I was talking to a friend the other day about like life, like doing life with Jesus versus like not with Jesus. And we were just talking about like how if you look at life like a marathon, we're all running this marathon. Like we're all in life. And I was like, doing life with Jesus is kind of like there's this amazing person giving you a piggyback ride versus and like feeding you electrolytes and grapes as they're running the race for you. And like without, you're dehydrated, you're throwing up every mile. It's like you're making it through, but how do you want to make it through? You know what I mean? And I think what's so cool too about just your journey and your process, it's like that contemplation on God, asking the tough questions. And there's so many people in that boat right now. I even like for me, again, like I love reading like apologetics work and like reading like the logic behind how one God is real, like, like personal God versus impersonal God, and then how they found Jesus to be real, like the historical evidence. Like I love geeking out about that kind of stuff. There's a book called Is God Real by Lee Strobel that just came out. He wrote Craze for Christ, really good. He was the Chicago Tribune journalist. And anyways, he's phenomenal. But I'm reading right now and it's just, it blows up your faith to a different proportion because you're like, this makes sense. But I wouldn't have experienced this if I didn't lean into that tension and surrender to, I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to be brave enough to ask the question.
Yes, it's an invitation. That's what it is. It's an invitation. That tension, that conflict, that confusion, the chaos that you experience when you're all confused about what do I believe? What do I not believe? What does this mean? What is it? It's an invitation to go deeper. And it's not always clean and neat at first. You know, it can feel very messy. But if you just kind of continue pulling on the thread, you'll be surprised at how you're led to what exactly you were led to. And boy, the apologetics, I have to say, I thank my sister for this. She's a minister and a speaker, and she's the one who introduced me to the apologetics. And I just fell in love. And then it led me to all these other incredible Christian mystics, St. Augustine and Meister Eckhart. And then these books like, there's The Cloud of Unknowing and the Book of Privy Council. Written by anonymous. Like there's
You're
so
gonna
many.
have to send me your Google Doc list after this. I have one for you too. I'll send you.
Please do. Yeah, I'm obsessed with books because I've always been smart enough to know that I'm not very smart, and there are smart people in the world that I want to learn.
Those are the smartest kind of people, though. The ones that know that they're not the smartest in the world, so they actually absorb the information because they ask the questions. But I think what's so powerful too is just like you said, it's like it's leaning into that tension, being open. And there's a pastor I love. He put this illustration of prayer this way, but I think it's a good means for this whole idea of leaning into the tension. He said a lot of times we think when we come to prayer, it's going to be like if you turn the faucet on and clear water comes out. We're going to have all the answers. It's going to be so serene. He's like, no, a lot of times it's like, have you ever been to a lake house, but the lake house hasn't been used in 3 years, and you turn on the shower and it's like brown, muddy, gunky water, but eventually it clears up. That's like prayer. It's like you go and you turn on the faucet and things get more confusing. Like sometimes they get more unclear, but if you just keep leaning in, it gets clearer. And I think that's the same with when you first start asking yourselves, okay, do I believe this or did my parents believe this? At first it's muddy. Yes. At first it's good, but then if you just keep pressing in, that's when the beauty opens up. And I know we're coming up on time, Robert. I just got to ask though, for you, like obviously we're called to love all people. We are called to be friends and lovers and lights for all people. I'm just curious for you and your journey, you went through that exploration. What ultimately led you back to Jesus?
Yeah. Gosh, man, that's a powerful question. I think when I had that knee-jerk reaction and frustration and confusion around the Bible particularly, I then moved into science because science really appealed to my analytical mind. And so I started to, then what I discovered was I started reading more and more science, particularly positive psychology. I saw all these principles and themes and threads that sounded an awful lot like what I had read in the Bible before. And then I discovered New Age stuff like Esther Hicks and Eckhart Tolle. And I was like, oh my goodness, like that sounds like it too. And then sometimes if I was lucky, these folks, these teachers who wouldn't maybe be called traditional Christians, but are certainly Christian at heart, that all of a sudden they were shedding light on these things that I couldn't quite fully understand in a way that I could have only gotten from them. So, as I continued down this path, I started to see like the same message that Christ everywhere. I couldn't miss it. There was nowhere to go that you couldn't see it or feel it or experience it. And I began to experience it through all traditions, all spiritual and religious traditions. There's you might have heard, Rama Krishna was a man who experienced God through every religion and every, that was his intention. He once said, I want to experience God through every sort of religion and spiritual tradition. I feel like I've got a little bit of that inside of me, but it all led me back to the deepest appreciation for Christ and Jesus' teaching. And I just feel like it speaks to me in a way that nothing else does.
I love that. It's like he's the cornerstone, and it's like you're either going to stumble on him or you're not. And it's like, I just think that's just so cool. And I think that speaks to so many people, because what I love about our God is that he honors and loves and blesses and guides so many journeys for so many types of people. And that's what makes things so fascinating. And that's what gets to know, like, even like I always believe before I get on this podcast, I always, say, have a few minutes of prayer. I'm like, God, help me see you in this person, because every person you meet is a walking reflection. Like that's God. Like there's a part of God in that person that you would never meet otherwise. The person checking you out at CVS, the person who's waiting on you at, I don't know, McDonald's, if they have waitresses, I don't know, but yes. and whatever, to go line, whatever. But like, there's all the barista, there's God in there. And that's a reflection of him,
You just nailed it. I love that. That's also me. And I do it, I have to admit, from very selfish places, because I just like the way it feels so good to me. It feels so good to me. And I enjoy that more than anything else. I take great delight and pleasure in that. And to your point, like when I had a hard time in the beginning understanding like original sin, like,
Mhm.
eating from the tree, the knowledge of good and evil. And what you just said speaks to that beautifully and perfectly. As soon as I'm in my head about whether somebody or something is evil or good, I know that I've, in that moment, separated myself from the presence of God. And you're right. It's like,
Wow. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, say that again.
yeah,
That's so good.
yeah. Anytime I am in my head or even my heart trying to discern or think about or judge what is good and what is evil, or who is good and who is evil, I have separated myself from the presence of God, and I've recommitted the original sin in that very moment. And that's not something to beat yourself up for. It's just something to recognize and let go of, and also come around to understand again that you can never really be separated from God. You can only think that you're separated. You can only feel separated. You can actually be separated. That's why we're here where we are. And so, to your point, the highest priority for me, the only thing that I truly know, is that when I practice the presence of God, my life seems to go so well and I feel so good. And that mostly means staying out of my head, staying out of too many words, too much language that is good and bad, good and evil, and trying not to do that thing. And instead, I'm staying connected with the felt oneness that's always there, that we sometimes overlook. So, yes, what you said earlier, I mean, Annie, you just crushed it. And I just feel so much gratitude for you, for the light and the insight and the wisdom that, and the love that you share, not just with me, but that you share with all of us. And I mean that, like, even as you show up today, it's just so powerful. And I feel both enlightened and,
Thank you.
and positively entertained, and I mean that in the highest way. Like, it's just really awesome that you do what you do and the way you do it.
Oh my gosh, I received that. I remember when we were getting on, you're like, you're working on receiving.
Yeah, always.
I am too. I even was talking to a friend the other day. I I feel, and I feel like I can speak this about you too, like a spiritual gift of encouragement. Like you, and I think our spiritual gifts, to me, my definition of a spiritual gift is it gives you just as much life in your heart when you do it as it does the other people when you do it. And so, like, it doesn't, like, for me, when I actively encourage somebody, it gives me life. And so, but all that to say, I was so funny. I was talking to this person, they're like, but Annie, who is that for you? Like, who encourages you? And it's funny because I have people in my life that do, but I'm curious for you as an encourager. Sometimes it's so hard for me to hear the encouragement, absorb it. And I recognized, I think one of the reasons I love encouraging people so much is because it's coming from my voice. And it's like I'm hearing the words my heart craves so often from my own voice. Because again, biggest
Well,
critic. So do you relate to that at all? Or is that something?
100%, like,
Yeah.
without question. Thankfully now, like you, because I've practiced it for so long, I am my own encourager. That being said, no one can really rival my mom. My mom was the greatest encourager of all time. To this day, she's probably sitting right now listening to this podcast as I'm doing it, despite being a grown adult, right? And that's my mom. My sister's the same way. My brother's that way. My dad, I remember my dad saying something as a kid that really resonated with me. He didn't say a whole lot always in this respect, but he said, "Son, you have greatness in you." Like, even when we were at moments when I wasn't quite seeing things his way, or maybe I wasn't behaving according to what he wanted me, to do. He would say that, and it just struck me, and it landed with me in such a way that I remember to this day. And to your point, I discovered also that people are wonderful, people are awesome, and I love people, and I love encouragers, and people are terribly unreliable sources of peace, love, and happiness. That's a really good thing, right? Really good thing.
Retweet.
Yes, because the worst thing that you or I could be, or that anybody could be for us, is people pleasing. And by that I mean, if they were to do a really good job of always providing for us the encouragement we wanted, or the peace, love, and happiness that we wanted, we would no longer seek the source for it. Right? And so the beautiful thing about all people, whether you get along with them or not, whether they encourage you or not, is that in their encouragement or lack thereof, they lead you right back to the source of peace, love, and happiness that exists within you, that you and I might call God or Christ.
That's so, when you said that, I was thinking back to that vase analogy. Imagine if you were relying on those cups to fill you in order to give it back to them. And like, yeah, it's, if anything, in that book I'm reading by Leif Strobel, one of the pieces of evidence that this scientist was talking about was like, scientists cannot explain this longing that we have in us, like this longing. Like, why is there this longing scientifically? What does that mean? Like this longing for stuff that things do not fill. Like you can't explain that. Like, why is there this longing for something? And I just, going back to, like, I think a lot of people, that longing, they try to fill it with people's validation. That's like through sports, through a job, through money, through career, through fame, through success, through their spouse. And it's like you said, it ultimately, when that doesn't work, it leads you back to,
oh, you just crushed something. So this is where Eastern tradition, or like spiritual traditions, helped me see something that was deep inside the Bible, which is in the Bible sometimes it's called spiritual poverty, and then actually talked about in a really beautiful way if you listen to the way Jesus talks about it. In the East, they talk about it as human emptiness. But what I discovered, to your point, is that we all can feel empty at times, and there's a void inside, and we're longing so much for somebody or something. And the temptation in those moments is to try to fill it up with stuff or with people or experiences, and that's okay. You're going to do that. You know, you're human. And also, there's a divine opportunity there to embrace that human emptiness, to really try and love it, to try and just at least accept it and be in it, exist in it. That's what meditation is. That's what prayer is. But you exist in it. And then what you discover is that human emptiness isn't empty at all. It's full. It's a spiritual fullness. It's a fullness of God and of peace and of love and of joy. But it's like a dark room. When you first enter a dark room, you're convinced there's nothing there. There's like nothing in here, nothing I want. But if you sit in there long enough, your eyes adjust. And as your eyes adjust, we might call that insight. We might call that seeing by faith and not by sight. But the idea is that if you sit there long enough, that darkness, that depression, that anxiety, that stress, that void, that emptiness becomes lit up, and it becomes full of everything and everyone you're looking for. And then all of a sudden, it starts to be reflected back to you from the world. So suddenly you feel a little bit more peace. At first, it's very subtle. It's like turning a dimmer switch up on a halogen lamp. It's very, very subtle at first. But if you keep just staying there, just come back to it over and over again, it lights up a lot, more and more and more. And then before you know it, you begin to feel more of that peace, love, and joy, and you feel this fullness. And then when you go out in the world, you see it reflected back to you, and that's also the way that you've seen the scripture before, but it's like, to those who have nothing, everything, to those who have, more is given. To those who have nothing, or feel they have nothing, even that little bit they have is taken away. That idea, that's kind of where it comes from. That idea of like, if you can kind of sit and learn to embrace your emptiness and not try to fill it up with stuff or people experiences, it becomes fullness. And in that fullness, you begin to see it reflected back to you from the world, in opportunities with money and supply and things like that.
It's like you can't receive if your hands are like this, holding on to this little thing. Like, you have to open it up, let it go, and then you can receive. Yes. You can see my fake tanner, everybody, that I put on earlier. But like, then you can receive that thing that God has for you. It's so funny. I actually just this week, I've never done this before. I really pushed myself. I did a 3-day fast. And it was like, I was inspired by Mike Posner did like a 5-day fast. I was like, okay, I'm going to try 5. I'm going to do 3. And I did it. And it was so funny because at first it was so uncomfortable. And I couldn't distract myself with food. I couldn't make it. But what happened was, when I pressed into that discomfort, and like it's like my body eventually was so lit up with energy. It's like, it was great. The clarity. And what I loved is the doctor that was like guiding through the practices. She's not a believer, but she even said, now this is the best time to ask the universe for things, because you'll get answers. Again, I love it when people who aren't believers, like, and they're scientists, what they say lines up with the Bible, like prayer and fasting. Let's go. But she's like, ask the universe, seek guidance. This is the best time to do that. And it was crazy. Like, I guess the emptier I became, the more full of discernment I became, and the more full of things I wanted to be full of, but I was distracting myself because I didn't feel I have access to, with other things that were giving me like a manufactured fullness, like a counterfeit fullness. When I released myself of those means, I was able to receive the actual fullness.
Oh, that's so powerful. You're absolutely right. Oh gosh, that's so good. There's so much there. The one thing I want to highlight, because it speaks volumes to me, is the importance of not getting hung up on too much jargon or too much language, because that's the Pharisees thing, right? So in other words, like, I used to feel like when I was reading the Bible, like, oh wow, what is this New Age stuff? What is this law of attraction stuff? And then I'd say, well, what is this Buddhism thing? And what is this Taoism thing? And then I said, let me just drop the labels for a second. Let me feel into the essence of the message. Let me feel into the heart of the writer or the author or the teacher. Go to the heart, and let me just try to hear the spirit of what they're sharing, not the letter of the law here. And all of a sudden, you discover, oh my gosh, so many people are saying the same thing. So many people are expressing and sharing God's message, Jesus' message and teaching.
Yeah.
And they're saying it in ways that appeal to people who might not be ready to hear it the way you and I have been ready to hear it. And so it's really beautiful and phenomenal and fantastic way. And that's, again, why it's so important to sort of like, on one hand, like get out of our own way. Two, not to judge, just practice the presence. And if you practice it, you're going to see it and feel it everywhere and within everyone. And then you'd be surprised at how everything just confirms for you how beautiful and wonderful you are, everyone else is, and life is, despite all the crazy and seemingly disastrous and even depressing things that are going on in the world.
It's so true. Even like I think about David, a man after God's own heart. He asked so many questions and he leaned into, it wasn't a man after God's laws or a man after God's religion. It was like a man after God's heart. And you read the Psalms and he was so brutally honest with God. Like he was mad with God, but he said it. God, I'm angry. God, I feel upset. God, protect me. And then like, I love you. But he was so honest. And like something a preacher I love says is God can't bless who you pretend to be. Oh. And I think a lot of us we're walking around pretending like we wear cross necklaces, but we actually haven't done the work to say, do I believe this? So we're after we look at Jesus as the means to an end, not an end, like a path to get into heaven, but not the end. Oh. And I'm like, I don't want Jesus to be a ticket for me to have like a cool podcast ministry or a ticket for me to get into heaven or a ticket for me to have peace in my heart. No, he is it. He is the gift. Like love the giver more than the gifts.
Ooh, that's it right there. That is just it right there. You're right. Like, heaven isn't so cheap that it can be bought with a belief.
Wow.
Right? It's not so cheap. And that's not something to celebrate. Right? That doesn't mean that it has to be like, yes, for sure, it could be an investment of energy. It doesn't have to feel like hard work. At times, it will feel like hard work. It doesn't have to. To your point, it's not about, believing something to get into heaven. That's missing the point entirely. For me, it's letting go of all of my beliefs and then discovering I'm already in heaven. That kind of thing. So, you nailed it. I mean, I think it's easy for many of us, we almost accessorize these things sometimes, right? It's like, I'm going to have this belief or have this thought and I'll talk to people about it and blah, blah, but deep inside my heart, I'm just full of judgment or I'm just full of stress, anxiety. And those are okay. Those are all human things. But the point is that there's a place within you, within all of us, where there are no problems, where there is no illness, where there is no stress or anxiety, where there is no chaos or confusion, where there is just perfect, pure, immovable, unshakable peace, love, and joy. And I mostly call it happiness because I want everyone to feel that. And it's also the kingdom of heaven. It's also God. It's also Christ consciousness. Some people like God consciousness. But the point is that there's a place within you all the time. And you can access that place at any point in time, regardless of what's happening to you, what's going on around you, and regardless of how little or how much money you have, you can always access that place. And so I try to remember that myself, and I try to encourage other people to do the same. You don't have to believe. You don't have to believe. In fact, I would argue that after a certain amount of time, just doing precisely what you were saying, Annie, we start to discover that belief just gets in the way of it. Belief gets in the way of the experience of it. Like if you've seen light, you don't need to believe in light. If you've heard music, you don't have to believe in music. You know music. You don't have to believe it anymore. So there's a space beyond, right? So sometimes belief certainly helps, can help. But also, please know that if you don't believe, you don't need to believe in order to have an experience of Christ or God, and also it doesn't just stop at belief. It doesn't just stop at belief. We want to have an experience. It's what the mystics.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is it reminds me of the Lord's Prayer, like on earth as it is in heaven. It's like we're supposed to experience it here too, not just one day. It's here. It's now. And Robert, I feel like I could talk to you for 6 hours.
Forever.
Oh my gosh. Where can people find you so they can listen to more of you past this 57 minutes?
I so appreciate you, Annie, and we are going to be friends forever.
Yes, we have to. You're locked in. Sorry about it.
I'm happy to do that. Same. Folks can find me at my website at coachrobmack.com. You can also find me most social media platforms, probably most consistently Instagram, but all of them at Rob Mack, M-A-C-K official. You can find both my books, Happiness from the Inside Out and Left from the Inside Out, everywhere great books are sold, including Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And I'll just say one more thing, Annie.
Please.
What you just said about heaven not being a future experience only, I love so much. Like, you are an angel, like you are like literally a heaven sent angel. And my experience of angels is that, angels don't, like, they're not people that die one day and go to heaven, some future moment. They're people who carry their heaven with them all day, every day, and they turn everything into some heavenly divine experience through their, peace and their presence and their joy and their love. And you certainly do that. And devils, of course, are just the opposite of that. They take their hell with them everywhere they go, right? So, yeah, it's more of I'd say, a spiritual attitude that we want to begin to embody, I think, more consistently. And part of that is recognizing that heaven is always.
I could not have written a better cap off to this conversation, because that is literally the entire mission of this podcast. Every person has a ministry. Wherever you go, you take heaven with you wherever you go. Whether that's your corporate marketing job, your college philosophy class, your soccer field sports team event, your hanging out with the bars with the guys on a Friday night, like, you take heaven with you wherever you go. A hard punk rock concert, doesn't matter. You're like, where you are, God's there, heaven's there. Robert, okay, you're my new best friend, man.
Same. Done now, sealed.
Thank you so much for shining your light on. You're such a delight. I just am so tickled for them to hear this, and just appreciate you, who you are, your light, your boldness and courage to shine it and to be seen, in hopes that others will be healed and feel that warmth to shine theirs.
It's been my pleasure, my honor, and my privilege. Thank you so much, Annie. I love and adore you so much. Thank you.
And I hope that this blessed you and encouraged you, reminded you that God gave you a unique light, and it is your job to shine it in this world, because we need you to. That being said, if you were blessed by this message and you can think of anybody else that also needs this type of encouragement, do me a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, leave me a comment. It helps me out a lot and helps this message that I do believe God gave my heart to share with the world gets out. I hope you have such an amazing rest of your day.